What does it really mean to choose a team? Not for the contract. Not for the city. Not for the championship ring sitting at the end of some calculated decision tree. But for something deeper, something that most professional athletes spend their entire careers running away from admitting out loud. When Edwin Diaz signed with the Los Angeles Dodgers, the baseball world assumed they already knew the answer. Record contract. Powerhouse roster. The most glamorous franchise in the game. Of course he chose the Dodgers. Why wouldn't he? But Diaz looked straight into the camera and said something that stopped everyone cold. I didn't choose the Dodgers for the money. And the moment he said it, the moment those words left his mouth, a different question replaced the old one. Not why did he choose the Dodgers, but what exactly did he find there that money could never explain? The answer begins with a surprise for a group of children. And it ends with one pitch, one save, and one player standing on a mound realizing that the most important decision of his career had nothing to do with dollars at all. To understand what Diaz found in Los Angeles, you have to understand what he was carrying when he arrived. Edwin Diaz is not simply a pitcher. He is an experience. When his entrance music hits, the unmistakable, electric trumpet melody that has become synonymous with his name, entire stadiums stop breathing. Fans who have watched baseball for decades describe it as something they have never felt before. The music builds. The crowd rises. And then Diaz walks out, and for one inning, everything else disappears. But behind that entrance, behind that mythic closer persona, was a man who had spent years navigating exactly the kind of pressure that breaks careers. After a historically dominant run with one franchise, Diaz had moved through the fire of enormous expectations, injury, and public scrutiny. He had been the best in the world at his position. He had also been publicly, painfully human. And when the time came to make the biggest free agency decision of his life, every voice around him was speaking the language of contracts and market value and guaranteed years. He heard all of it. He processed all of it. And then he made a choice that surprised even people inside the game. Here is where the story takes a turn most people did not see coming. Diaz did not choose the Dodgers despite Shohei Ohtani. He chose the Dodgers, in part, because of him. Not because of what Ohtani does on a baseball field, though that alone is enough to make any competitor want to share a clubhouse with him. Diaz's reasoning went somewhere more personal than statistics. What Diaz had watched, from a distance, was the way Ohtani carries himself when no one is obligated to be watching. The preparation that happens before the performance. The consistency that lives in the invisible hours between games. And most importantly, the way Ohtani treats the people around him, not as background characters in his own legend, but as human beings who matter. When Diaz spoke about his decision, he circled back to this again and again. The culture of the clubhouse. The standard that had been set not through speeches or motivational posters, but through the daily behavior of its most important player. This is what Ohtani does that rarely appears in highlight reels. He establishes a standard of care, for preparation, for teammates, for the small human moments that accumulate into something larger than any individual performance. Diaz recognized it. And he wanted to be inside it. Before his first official appearance as a Dodger, before the cameras and the sold-out crowd and the pressure of protecting a lead in a pennant race, Diaz did something quiet. He organized a surprise for a group of children. The details of that gesture are less important than what the gesture itself revealed. This was not a public relations moment. It was not a photo opportunity engineered for social media. It was a man, newly arrived in a city that did not yet feel like home, deciding that his first priority was to make someone else's day extraordinary. The children did not know they were about to meet one of the most electric closers in the history of the sport. They only knew that something unexpected was happening, that someone was going out of their way for them without any obvious reason. For Diaz, it was not complicated. It was simply who he was when the contract negotiations were finished and the press conferences were done, and all that remained was the question of how he actually wanted to spend his time. And that choice, to begin his Dodger chapter not with a press conference boast but with a quiet act of generosity, revealed something about his true motivation that no contract figure ever could. He had not come to Los Angeles to be paid. He had come to become something. When Edwin Diaz took the mound for his first official save opportunity as a Dodger, the stadium felt it before he even arrived. The music started. If you have never heard it in person, it is difficult to fully explain what happens to a crowd in that moment. It is not simply excitement. It is a collective release, thousands of people simultaneously deciding to feel something together. The sound builds in waves. By the time Diaz reaches the mound, the noise has become physical. He stood at the top of that mound and did exactly what he had spent his entire career preparing to do. He closed the game. 3 batters. Precise, powerful, unflinching. The trumpet still echoing somewhere in the upper deck. The crowd was still on its feet. When the final out was recorded, Diaz did not pump his fist toward the sky or scream into the night air. He absorbed it. He looked around at the teammates running toward him and allowed himself one slow breath of something that resembled peace. This was the moment he had described without using these exact words. The moment where the reason for choosing this team, this city, this chapter of his career, suddenly had a physical location. It lived right here, on this mound, in this noise, surrounded by these people. The money had never been the point. This was the point. Diaz wanted something different. And he was willing to say so, directly, in an industry where admitting that kind of vulnerability is still considered unusual. I didn't choose the Dodgers for the money. Those 7 words carry a philosophy that runs deeper than one closer's free agency decision. They represent a question that every competitor eventually has to answer honestly: what are you actually playing for? Diaz had watched what Ohtani had built in that clubhouse, not just a winning environment, but a human one. A place where the best player in the world eats carefully chosen meals and listens to younger players and shows up with the same commitment on the last day of September as he does on opening day. That consistency, that refusal to separate personal character from professional performance, is what Diaz wanted to absorb. Not to copy it directly, but to let it elevate the version of himself he was still in the process of becoming. This is the lesson that the Japanese national team's advisor, Yu Darvish, spoke about when he talked about Ohtani's influence on younger players. Don't imitate the results. Examine the daily choices that make the results possible. Diaz had done exactly that. From across a league, he had studied not just Ohtani's ERA or his home run totals, but the philosophy embedded in how he lived his professional life. And then he made his decision accordingly. There is a pattern that appears in the careers of the athletes who last longest at the highest level. It is not a physical pattern. It is a values pattern. The players who sustain excellence across years and across adversity are almost never the ones who were purely motivated by external reward. They are the ones who found something inside the work itself, something that continued to feel meaningful even when the contract was signed and the headlines had moved on to someone else. Diaz found that meaning early. It lives in the trumpet. It lives in the children who got a surprise they did not expect. It lives in the quiet decision to join a culture rather than simply a payroll. What he found in Los Angeles was not just a better contract or a better roster. He found a standard. And for a competitor of his caliber, finding a standard worth rising to is worth more than any guaranteed year. The first save proved it. Not because the numbers were impressive, though they were, but because of what it meant to everyone watching. Including Diaz himself. At the end of that first appearance, as the stadium noise slowly settled and the Dodgers dugout celebrated, one question lingered. Not about Diaz's velocity. Not about his contract structure. Not about how many saves he might accumulate across the length of a season. The question was simpler, and more interesting. What does it take for a player to arrive somewhere new, stand in the noise, and feel that he is exactly where he is supposed to be? Diaz already knows the answer. He said it himself before a single pitch was thrown. It was never about the money. It was about becoming the kind of player, and the kind of person, that a team like this, built the way this one was built, around a standard set by someone like Ohtani, deserved to have standing on that mound. He arrived. He surprised some children. He earned a save. And in doing so, he proved that the most important decisions in baseball are rarely the ones that get negotiated at a table. They are the ones made quietly, before anyone is watching, about who you actually want to be.